go, and you can charge it. And so I would buy, and we would buy multiple. So it's like it had a button and it looked like a little elastic extender on it. So you wear a button. I always had like a much bigger neck than like you would think it would be, right? And so I still wear like a 16 and a half, which most people like don't. But it's anyway. So I was a big fan of the collar extender.
Should have gotten one of those.
If they were still around. Look at this crew down here. Shaq, Dean.
So great to see them. Shaq and Dean. Yeah. That's a great crowd.
Yeah, they were. We had a little wrestling thing yesterday. Introducing Sean Russell to some members of the wrestling community.
Sure.
He's doing a great job. We have 85 kids in there.
Yeah.
Used to be, I guess, little balls.
Sure.
Little mocks.
And that was what got us started. I mean, Thompson's, James, me, Jeff Geiser, how many state champions came out of the last program? And just great people. It was a good, David Nomla ran it for a long time. He was our first coach. And I saw all those things Sean was doing.
Hey, Zoe. Zoe Moshammer, meet Nate.
How do you do? Hey, Rollins. It's nice to see you. How are you doing?
One of my former favorite students, one of my current favorites.
Not that we have favorites, but yes. Yes, yeah, with Mr. Scott.
She's a recent soccer state champion.
Congratulations, yes. On all the coverage and everything, all the social media was awesome. Way to go. That's very cool.
Anyway, I just wanted to say hello.
Nice to see you. Congrats again.
This is awesome.
That was so cool that they
got it in
a great season.
It was like the least stressful state championship I think I've ever been a part of. Yeah. It was nice to go up early and then stay up and never really.
The semifinal was tight, right? So that was.
It was in a pouring down rain. It was tied. They were both PKs during the game, so it was 1-1 at the end of regulation. We played 2 halves of overtime, and we ended up winning 2-1. I know. It was tight, but we were the better team. We had like 18 shots on goal to like 3. But the rain's such a great deal to the
It'll take it down. That's tough.
Well, thanks again.
Thanks for having me. I love it. It's funny walking up. Shaq goes, "You two better reverse."
No pressure.
He said, "I still have the horse costume." So James and I played the horse in the spring play, and I was the horse's head, and James was the horse's rear. So to this day, he's
I
proud.
remember that. I had totally forgotten about
He's
that.
proud of telling people that he got to play the horse's ass in his final production. That was a lot of fun.
But he does enjoy saying it.
And it was so funny seeing Shaq in a different context because it was just as intense and demanded just as much from his actors as his athletes.
Ready? Yeah. All right. I'm going to go ahead and call him to order. All right. Good morning, Baylor School, and welcome to this chapel service. If you can go ahead and find your seat, we will begin with a procession of our military branch flags and then go on from there. I invite you all to join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. You may be seated. So tomorrow is November 11th, Veterans Day, and so today's chapel honors that occasion, and we are delighted to welcome home one of our distinguished alumni who's a veteran and someone that I looked up to. I don't know if he knows this. I looked up to him when I was a younger kid because he was this big football player, right? And he was this powerful athlete, and he was also scary smart. And so Nate Rawlings is one of those guys, one of those legendary Baylor upperclassmen that you kind of look up to and say, man, that's a cool guy. And so it's my distinct honor to welcome him up to the stage with his dear friend and classmate and our own history teacher, Mr. James Scott, who are going to introduce one another once you get up here. And before they do that, I have two announcements. One, Mr. Scott's World War II class. You all need to leave here at 11:10 so that you can go set up your presentations, and those will be on the first floor of the PAC. And I encourage everyone in here to go and hear those presentations. They've worked hard on those. We also have a special occasion to celebrate the 80th anniversary of the United Nations, which will take place tomorrow at the Community Time, History Time, where our own Mary Beth Hopping will present on that. So please, during Community Time, head over to the PAC atrium for that occasion. And the people who carried the flags in today, those are veterans who served in those branches, or they have family who served in those branches. And I would invite all of our veterans in the room today. Would you please stand? On behalf of the Baylor community and a grateful nation, thank you very much for your service. And without further ado, I'd like to hand this over to Mr. Scott, who is going to introduce his friend.
All right, everyone. This is probably my best friend in the world, Nate Rawlings. We've been buddies ever since we were in elementary school, wrestling together. We came through Baylor together. We served together. And since Nate left Baylor, he's gone on to do some truly amazing things. So hope you all listen and learn a little bit about what this place did to send Nate out into the world where he can make a real positive change.
Thank you. Thanks, Reverend Farr, for the invitation to come back home. Baylor is my home. So my mom, who's sitting right down here in the front row, started teaching at Baylor when I was 5 years old, joined the faculty, and then ran the library for 29 years. So there was not a moment in my life where Baylor hasn't been a central part of it that I can recall. And the 6 years that I was here as a student shaped and continue to shape my life immeasurably every day. Many of the times that I grew the most as a student, as an athlete, and as a human being were with this guy right here. As Mr. Scott said, we were friends through elementary school, met in kids wrestling club. First day of football practice in 7th grade, we became the right guard and right tackle on the football team. That extended for the next 6 years. We were wrestling practice partners for the next 6 years. And we joined the military around the same time. And then found ourselves on our first combat deployments. We left about 6 weeks of each other to go to Iraq the first time. And as he was patrolling parts of the western Anbar province, and I was sort of in western Baghdad, we were emailing back and forth, and figured out that we were about 15 miles away from each other, which, as it turns out, is about the same distance from the houses we grew up in on Lookout Mountain and Signal Mountain. So there's something strange and beautiful and, annoying about being on the far side of the world and being 15 miles away from your best friend and not being able to see him, and just going through this enormous experience. And so thrilled to get to talk about it today.
All right. So why did you decide to join the military? And once you were in, kind of what did that look like?
Yeah, so when I left Baylor in the fall 25 years ago, we just had our 25th reunion, I felt very prepared for college. Started going through freshman year of college just as a normal student. The military wasn't at all on my radar screen. We had some military experience in our family. My dad was an Army doctor, so I was born on an Army post in West Texas. But he left it when I was about 5 years old, so I didn't have that kind of visceral experience every day. But I felt like something was missing freshman year, and I couldn't quite put my finger on it. And I was just looking for something a little bit bigger, a way to serve. In hindsight, I can look back on it, and it was a way to serve something bigger than myself. So I went to Germany in the summer after my freshman year to study German language in Berlin, and read a lot of books on early Cold War history. This is the historian and the history lessons coming through. And I learned a lot about what the military had done after World War II to keep this bastion of Western democracy, alive in the midst of a Soviet occupation all around it. And so it was this fascinating time, and I got to visit the sites of the Berlin airlift and Checkpoint Charlie, where there was a very tense tank standoff. And I thought to myself, this would be a great thing to go into the military and see how I can serve, even though it was much like now, it was like a very peaceful time. So I came home and I told my parents, I think I want to join ROTC, and they said, that's great, why don't you look into it, do some research, and I did. I signed up. About 2 weeks after I signed up were the September 11th terrorist attacks, which killed 3,000 plus people, and really brought the country to a standstill. And so the ROTC folks, the commander called everyone in who was a part of the program and said, you've all joined under vastly different contexts than we're going to have now. Like the country, we don't know what it's going to look like, but our country will go to war. And we want you to think hard about that if that's something you still want to pursue and be a part of. And so they actually had all of our contracts on the table with like a kind of additional thing you had to sign, or they wanted us to sign. And so one by one, almost all of us signed it and slid it back across the table. And then it became kind of a very real thing. We were sort of training as in college still, as doing officer training as we were watching in this first the invasion of Afghanistan unfold, later the invasion of Iraq unfold, and sort of wondering what will this look like when we finally get there. And what the military looked like when I first got there was a lot of training, a lot of preparation. I went through several training schools in Missouri and in Texas, and then finally shipped out on the first deployment 6 weeks right before you did.
So you talked about some of your training. What was your job in the Army?
So I was a third-generation combat engineer, and I joined that, or picked that as my specialty because they told me that it was a thinking person's infantry. Nothing against infantry folks. They do a lot of hard work and hard fighting, but it was a chance to serve with infantry and armor like tanks and these what they call maneuver elements, but you have additional training and additional tasks, mostly carrying on explosives and blowing things up, which was an awful lot of fun. But your job in a kind of classic war sense as a combat engineer is to make sure that everybody else can go where they need to go, that the enemy can't go where they want to go, and that everyone can survive when you get there. So you clear minefields, you blow up obstacles, you make it harder for like an enemy to attack you. And it was just a neat problem. I'm not an engineer by training. I was a history major. But I thought it was a neat, there you go, a neat set of skills to have and just a really neat mission. And so, but by the time I got to Iraq in the really like December of 2005, and we got up to Iraq right around the new year in 2006, there was less of a need for some of those classic engineer missions. And so we had Bradley fighting vehicles, which is like an armored vehicle that's meant to carry troops. I know there might be a picture of one in some of these folks here, some of these photos. But we went out and we were guarding the main highway leading into Baghdad Airport that they use as a supply route to bring in everything that 200,000 troops need, food, fuel, ammunition, generators, medicine, you need it. And so the convoys carrying all of those things would be 40 vehicles long, and they traveled under headlights. And so they're huge targets to get attacked by insurgents. And so we would position ourselves where if the convoys did get attacked, they could haul out real fast, and we would take care of whoever was doing the attacking.
All right, so in those vehicles, can you tell me something about like what it was like in a Bradley? I've kind of referred to it as it's the angry child of a paint can shaker and an easy bake oven. Could you tell me like where, like when the track shows up here, can you tell them like where you were and kind of what you did in there?
It's a perfect description. No notes at all. So a Bradley is kind of a smaller version of a tank. A tank those are Bradleys right there, yes. So it's a track vehicle, so it can go over all kinds of terrain. It can go uphill, downhill. It can go in muddy places. It can go over ditches and things like that. It's got room in the back to carry, I think, like 6 soldiers kind of packed in there like sardines, maybe 8 if you really get tight in there. And then a driver in the front, and then the turret, the part in the top, had the vehicle commander and then the gunner. And it had a 30-millimeter chain gun that the gunner operated, and the commander was sort of in the right side hatch. And you would, tell the vehicle where to go, and if you were the section leader or the platoon leader, you would keep track of all of your vehicles who were with you. But that's a really good description because it was very tight. I'm not a small person. Played a lot of football and did not fit well in a Bradley. One of the questions I got asked when I first came home was, have you ever ridden in a tank? And I said, yes. And then the second question was, what's it like in a tank? And I said, roomy, because a tank is much bigger. You get a little bit more room to stretch out. A Bradley was sort of very tight. So you're in this very tight armored vehicle, going places and doing things.
So your first deployment you spent as a platoon leader in the Bradley. Now, as the war in Iraq changed, what role did you play in your second deployment?
So I actually had 2 jobs in the first deployment. So for about 6 months, we were having that job of guarding the main roads. And then our job shifted into a little bit more of a classic engineering job where we went and found roadside bombs. And so they gave us these special vehicles. They were South African demining vehicles, which had better armor and then a V-shaped hull. Because one of the most dangerous things is if a roadside bomb went off right underneath you, that was where the armor was the weakest in a vehicle, because they're designed to fight, sort of an enemy that's above ground. But these vehicles were both higher, and then that V-shaped hull would deflect the blast away from the vehicle and keep the folks inside a little bit safer. So they gave us this equipment. They gave us a bunch of other kind of nifty things like little robotic arms and things where we could dig on the side of the road. And our job was to literally patrol the roads at about 5 miles an hour and try to find bombs. And as we'll talk about a little bit, one of the jobs that Mr. Scott had was as an explosive ordnance disposal team leader. And so our moms thought it was very funny that my job was find the bombs and James's job was defuse the bombs. It kind of fit with a bit of our personalities and worked out pretty well for everybody. But then on my second deployment, I came home, and 13 months later went right back, and I was an embedded advisor to the Iraqi army. I lived on a tiny little outpost in the middle of Baghdad with a battalion of Iraqi troops, and our job was to train them, get them ready for the U.S. to leave, because this was later in the war. So we learned a little bit of Arabic, but we had translators, but we lived literally side by side with these Iraqi troops and ate with them and fought with them and spent all of our time with them. That was a really fascinating job.
All right. I know I get asked a decent number of questions about what my service was like, but the one that I kind of wish that folks would ask that they don't very often is like, what's the funniest or one of the funny things that are appropriate to mention in a chapel that happened while you were in service?
Yeah, so Reverend Farr, I'll try to keep this PG, knowing the setting here. My first deployment, we lived on a really small forward operating base that was just off of the massive Baghdad airport complex. And so that BIOP, as they called it, Baghdad International Airport, had about 50,000 troops. And so it was sort of they had taken all this kind of army bureaucracy or military bureaucracy and just airlifted it over there. So there were speed limits. There were big dining halls, chow halls that had ice cream. And it was almost like being, in a little city just over in Iraq. We were on a tiny outpost that was just off of that, so things were a little bit, looser, and because we were going out and patrolling every day. But as that base got a little bigger and they moved more soldiers there, they brought in a support unit that redid the entryway. And so we had a sergeant major who decided he wanted to take this entryway that had worked just fine for months and add all kinds of concrete barriers and a very complicated serpentine to slow down any attacking enemy. But he made them so tight that our Bradley vehicles didn't fit. It didn't fit at all. And so we went out and we walked the ground and we kind of measured it off and determined we can get out on a patrol, but we're going to have a very hard time getting back in. So I went to see the sergeant major and I said, Sergeant Major, and he had never been in a unit where they had these types of vehicles before, and I said, the serpentine that you've designed is too tight and we can't fit our Bradleys back in there. And he said, well, this is Army standard. You're just going to have to figure it out. And I said, I promise you we won't fit, so we're either going to damage our vehicles or we may damage your beloved entryway. And he said, well, whatever, just go figure it out. He actually said as I left, do what you have to do. So we went out on which is always a bad thing to say to a young lieutenant. Do what you got to do.
Terrible thing to say to a young lieutenant.
Terrible. So we went out on our patrol that night. We came back about 4 a.m, and sure enough, the Bradley didn't fit. And so I got down off of the hatch, the top hatch, and I walked, just trying to ground guide the vehicle, and we literally weren't going to make it. We were either going to knock off some of the additional armor, we were going to destroy these concrete barriers, or drive up on them with a 35-ton vehicle and kind of crush them. And so I climbed back up into the hatch, put back on the headset, and I told my Bradley driver, Kenny Joseph, we called him Joe, I said, let's try something else. Back up 20 or 30 yards. So he backed up as far as he could go. And I said, all right, Joe, ramming speed. He said, what? I said, hit the gas. Just give it everything you got. So he floored it, and he started taking off. And the Bradley can get up to about 40 miles an hour. We didn't have enough time for that, but he got running really fast. He said, where am I hitting it? And I said, right on the nose, because that's where the armor's the strongest. So Joe hit the first barrier, and he sent it flying about 10 yards, and all the barriers were chained together with steel cables. So then 3 or 4 other barriers went flying after that and created this massive pileup of carnage that we used to be this beautiful standard serpentine entryway. So sure enough, we had a great way in, and we went in and parked the vehicles, and I downloaded all my gear and said, all right, I guess I got to go turn myself in. So I went back over to the sergeant major, and I said, we had a little bit of a problem coming back from our patrol. And when he got out there, he had a total conniption and was very displeased. But my bosses, knowing that I had gone to see him and that I had given him every fair warning that this wasn't going to work, said, look, this is your problem. And they kind of cleaned up the mess. They made a pretty straight entryway where we could get in, and then that sergeant major was given a new challenge to tackle at a different base.
For me, one of the funniest things that I got to see and be part of was I had shown up in Germany, and pretty shortly after that, we'd gone out into the field. It's like a really miserable camping trip. But I had been tasked with guarding a concrete pad with a box of ammunition on it for 3 straight days. And it was pretty boring, but I had plenty of off time. And one time after I got off guard, I had just gotten a new German cell phone. I was able to call back home, and also knew that Nate had just shown up and gotten his brand new platoon about 5 or 6 days earlier. And this is a Thursday night. And I know I did the math, and in Killeen, Texas, at Fort Hood, where he was stationed, it was about 2:30 in the morning. And so I was like, oh, I'll give Nate a shot. And so I called Nate, and I just hear, hello, because it's 2:30 in the morning. And I go, yes, sir, this is Specialist Johnson. I'm at the Killeen Police Precinct Station. I got arrested, and all I hear from Nate is, not again. Which I had to stop it at that. I was like, again? Apparently your guys had a big night the previous weekend.
They were a funny team. Yes. occasionally cross the line.
All right. Even though we did have different jobs, our paths really did mirror each other. We were both at Hood together. We both got to crank off a lot of bang. We got to do similar things. We were deployed at similar times. What did that kind of similarity end up meaning to you in terms of like how you navigated your service, kind of what that was like?
Yeah. So after Mr. Scott got done with his first deployment, he got stationed at Fort Hood, which is where I had been, and it was amazing then having your best friend literally like 2 miles away and being able to see him, almost every day. That was about the time that he tried out for the explosive ordnance disposal team, which is a very elite team. You have to have incredible mental toughness and physical skills. And do you want to tell the story about the EOD tryouts in July?
So before they let you go to EOD school, they call it a bomb suit test, and you wear the 80-pound bomb suit, and they run you around for about an hour in it, and the goal is to get you to freak out, to see if wearing this thing in 98 degrees, 100-degree humidity is going to kind of get you to break. And right when you think they're done, a guy walks out with a coffee mug, and he even pretended to sip it, which I thought was a jerk move. And then he threw it. And the entire thing was full of pennies, dimes, nickels, and quarters, and I got to organize all of them by date. But Nate came and picked me up afterwards.
Yeah, so I'd planned when he was done with all this, this was middle of July, again, like about a 100-degree day, to pick him up after he was done with all this. And so I pulled up, and he was just soaking wet, exhausted. And I opened the door to the truck, and I threw him a Gatorade, and I said, "James, how was it?" And he said, "It was challenging, but it had nothing on Death Valley wrestling practices." And so Death Valley was the time between the regional tournament and the state tournament that we affectionately referred to as Death Valley, where Shaq Van Dusen, who's sitting right here, would put us through our paces with fresh wrestling opponents every 5 minutes or so to really wear you out. And it was one of the most difficult things that I've ever done. And so that mental toughness and physical toughness and being able to translate that into things that you had needed to do was spot on. And so having that shared Baylor experience, we knew exactly what he was going through.
Since we're kind of come back full circle to Baylor, you've gone on and done really, truly amazing things. But what was hard for you here? What did you struggle with as a student or as an athlete?
So growing up, I used to come to Baylor football games with my dad starting when I was probably 5. And we were 12 years old when Baylor had their centennial in 1993, which was still the Baylor-McCallie game, which we hosted on a Saturday in 93, was still one of the biggest sports events that I can recall in my life. Bigger than the Super Bowl. It was just amazing. And so I think one of the dreams that I had, and then as we got to know each other, that we both had, was to be captains of the football team. And then the other thing that we really together trained for a decade plus was to be state champion wrestlers. And fast forward to our senior year, we had a really talented football team. We had just a bunch of great guys out there, worked really hard in the off season, were real strong. And one by one, everyone got hurt. Our quarterback tore his ACL in the very first game. Second string quarterback went out with a bad concussion, I think it was. And then so the season that had a lot of promise quickly turned into what felt like a nightmare. We wound up going 0-9, and having had the distinction to be the captains of, the team with the worst record in Baylor history.
To include the years in the 50s where the school was shut down for pandemics.
Yes. And so that was really, and to put icing on the cake, I tore my MCL in the last game. And so it was really hard to get through all that and think about just this thing you'd been thinking about since you were a little kid, and it was over, and it had ended in a way that neither of us wanted to end. But there was another challenge, because there was wrestling season coming up. So I rehabbed the knee as best I could. We got ourselves into wrestling shape, and we got out there on the wrestling mat. We had a really good season. We were defending state champions. We wound up taking second in the state that year, but we both came a couple points shy of winning, the state title that we had trained for our whole lives. And so I think that was incredibly hard to know that, a dream that you'd had, that you'd worked for, that you'd struggled for, was over and you didn't quite achieve that goal. But then I think both of us thought, all right, what's the next challenge? And as we went off to college and then started looking at the military in our own way, it was another challenge, and it was right there. So if there's one big lesson that I take from Baylor, it's learning how to deal with failure, because you're going to fail at something. I wish nothing but the greatest success for everyone in here. I hope you accomplish everything you want to do. But within that journey, you will fail. If it's a small failure, if it's a big failure. And so learning to pick yourself up, to learn the lessons from that failure, it's sort of an adage to it's not if you fall down, but how fast you get up, and how fast you get up and how fast you learn from what knocked you down that will determine whether you can go on and be a success next. And I learned all of that here.
We've only got about a minute left here. But what does Veterans Day mean to you now that you've grown up around veterans? We saw them as teachers and as coaches. You served in the Army, and now that's behind you. What does this day kind of represent to you?
Yeah, so Baylor's always had a great military tradition, and including when the years when it was a military school and my dad was in last class, where there was a military program. But I always remembered a story my grandmother told. Her brothers were classes of, try to get this right, Dad, 36, 39, and 43. Were my grandmother's three brothers who went here to Baylor. And so the ones who graduated in 1936 and 1939, there was rumblings, but it was before the war started. Well, the class of 43, my grandmother said she remembers those boys marching downhill in their Baylor military uniforms, and the very next day went on, put on a different uniform, and went right off to war. And so there were many years that Baylor really fed directly into that military program and military operation, and then the service and sacrifice of Baylor alumni or Legion. So I remember that very viscerally when I thought about joining the military. And I think Veterans Day and Memorial Day means a lot to me going forward because of the people who did pay that sacrifice. And so we both have a lot of friends that we lost who were 19, 22, 25. The oldest dear friend that I had was my company commander, who was killed, and he was 32. And he had 4 kids. And his kids still miss him very much to this day. And so I think about those folks who continue to sacrifice, the families who continue to have an empty seat at their kitchen table. And then Veterans Day is a time to honor them and to continue to appreciate that sacrifice and to continually thank those people for what they've given all of us.
Well, I think that's our time. Thank you for coming back, Nate.
Thanks for having me.
Our mission at Baylor is to instill in students, in you, both the ability and the desire to make a positive difference in the world. I can't think of 2 better examples than the former students who came up today and shared their stories with us. And speaking for faculty, I can also say how rewarding it is when you see former students take one of many paths that you can take from Baylor. And you're fortunate to have so many alums come back and share their stories, and you see all the many paths you can take beyond the gates of Baylor. But I can say, as a proud faculty member and a former teacher and coach of both of these guys, how proud I am of them and how grateful I am for all that they've done, both for our country and for each of us as Baylor alumni. So thank you both for coming back. Can we give them one more round of applause? So as the choir comes forward, I invite you to stand if you can. We're going to sing our national anthem.
I ask our visitors to stay behind for some photographs, and the rest of us, you may be dismissed with the help of senior leadership.
We're going to ask that all veterans who are here with us to come to the stairs, please, for a photo. All veterans who are here with us to the stairs for a photo. Okay, we'll do the first one without hats. Okay, we're going to have, Molly, where do you want everyone? Just right here? Okay, all the veterans. All the Baylor vets who are here today. Right here.
All right, you might need to organize people a little better. How do you want? There we go. All right. This is great.
1, 2, 3. Yeah, 1, 2, 3. Perfect. All right, so is their hat on?
Tell Coach Morgan we're sorry. Just for a second.
I can't believe you're wearing a hat indoors.
That's what he's saying right now.
All right, ready? 1, 2, 3. Perfect.
All right. Yeah. They'll have their stuff up.
Thank you. That was great.
Thank you.
Great job.
That's amazing.
Way to go, Nate. I loved it. That's all. I told you our scholarship dinner. You did a fantastic job with that. Love to see you.
Hey, Molly. One more. Sorry.
See you, sir. Take care. We're going to head over there. And, hey, Matt.